Good morning. Welcome to Monday morning and welcome to our thought for today. This week we're looking at the passage that we spent some time on yesterday morning, 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 1 to 9. This is such an amazing book, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. 1 Peter especially for me, it's one of those books that I feel is so honest because it doesn't try to gloss over what the Christians in the early church were suffering. Peter speaks about it. He speaks openly and honestly about it. And he's determined that people know and understand that they are not alone, that God is with them, and that what they're going through is part of, in a sense, the seed for the future church. We often say that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. In a sense, 1 Peter speaks about that and in many ways encourages us to realize that those who give their lives for us give their lives so that in many ways we would have the church we have today. And so that should in some ways give us the attitude of pressing on and being brave and courageous in our faith, knowing that we have this wonderful background to our Christian faith of those who did the same thing. It's not easy when we think of suffering. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to have to go through anything that takes us out of our comfort zone. And yet here very clearly Peter assures them that this is part of God's plan, and yet there is that reward waiting for them. But I really want to look just for the first couple of days this week at the few verses that open up this chapter as Peter introduces himself, but then as he also speaks to those to whom he's writing. And that's really what we're looking at this morning. The passage starts off, Peter says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia and Bithynia. Really that's the area we would call Asia Minor, and in many ways the area especially that we refer to often as Turkey. But it's this one phrase that I want to think for just a couple of moments this morning as our thought for today. He says, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? The elect exiles. The elect are God's chosen ones, the ones that God has called to himself, in many ways echoing back to the children of Israel, to those who, we know obviously that the children of Israel is God's own people, and the whole way through the book of Exodus, God echoes this and affirms them that they are his chosen people. But then through the New Testament, Christ's arrival, there's this sense that God's elect, God's chosen ones are no longer just the children of Israel, but also those he calls to himself, those who have come to faith in Jesus Christ. So basically Peter's saying, even at the very start of it, I'm writing to you and you need to understand that I regard you as God regards you, as his elect, as his chosen ones, that he put his hand on you and therefore he has not forgotten you. And there are obviously far more theological issues we could, if we had time, we could talk about to do with this phrase. But this idea of exiles as well. An exile is someone who is no longer living in their home place, in their hometown. I remember very often in Dungannon Rugby Club, there was always the exiles game that came up usually towards the end of the year, where the first 15 would play those who had belonged to the club but had moved on and maybe travelled on, maybe some to other parts of Northern Ireland, maybe other parts of the UK, even other parts of the world, but that they would be invited back to form a team that would play the team that was currently at the club, the exiles game, those who no longer lived where they once lived. There's also within this word in the Greek, the idea of a sojourner, someone who passes through, someone who doesn't spend a lot of time there, but someone who had to keep on moving. And with this word that we read, the exile, they're exiles of the dispersion. This is a time when the church was basically scattered. After Christ had gone and the church was formed, persecution we know came in. Paul, or Saul as he was then, came and he persecuted those believers. He sought to find them, put them in jail, and in many ways they were scattered. And they were scattered not just in the area around Jerusalem, and Judea, Samaria, etc., but actually to the outermost parts of the world, the known world at that time. And then he goes on to list these places. So from the very outset, what's happening here is Paul is saying, I'm speaking to you, those of you who know that maybe once your home was Jerusalem, but it no longer is Jerusalem. You've been scattered, you've been chased away. But I'm writing to you because I acknowledge that that you are part of God's plan. Even though you're not within Jerusalem where you want to be, even though you're maybe not with the fellow believers you want to be, that you're still part of God's plan. And I'm writing this to you to encourage you. And so I want to encourage you this morning. This maybe is a very narrow band of people I'm referring to this morning, but maybe this morning you find yourself not where you want to be. Maybe you've had to move because of work.Maybe you've had to move because of family situations. Maybe you moved because you got married and moved away, or maybe you're living somewhere where you've suddenly realized, a lot of my friends are no longer here. They've moved on. And maybe there's that sense of loneliness. Maybe even within your Christian fellowship, maybe you were once part of a strong fellowship where there were lots of other believers, and maybe that fellowship for many reasons is no longer there, and you're maybe wondering even about joining a new church. There's that sense that at the root of all this, you have your faith. But sometimes it's really difficult to be a believer if you don't have that fellowship around you. In fact, I would say it's almost impossible to be a believer and not have people around you. These people that Peter was writing to, these are people who were scattered, who were like sheep without a shepherd. The wolf had come and scattered the sheep. And so they found themselves maybe finding it very difficult to exercise their faith, to be part of a community, to be able to share their faith, to be able to be encouraged. And so this letter went to them. And I want to encourage you this morning that there are many really good churches around. If you need to find a church, you just ask the right questions to the right people. Use discernment. If you want to talk to me about it, if you find yourself somewhere and you need to know a good church in the area, I will try and help you or put you in touch with someone. But also for those of you who are maybe just feeling a bit lonely in your faith, I want to encourage you today to keep going, to be strong, to find someone to have fellowship with, and to meet regularly. Even if you can't meet face to face, you can meet. We know you can meet online. It's been proven to us over this last 14 months or so. But it's so important that you don't try to be a Christian on your own, especially in this world we're living in. It's a harsh, tough world. So Peter was writing to the church that was scattered, the people who were alone in their faith, the people who just maybe lacked that opportunity to be together. And I want to encourage you today to know and to make an effort to be in fellowship with other believers, because your faith needs it, and you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to your sanctification, that you're growing and developing in the Lord, to be part of a community. Maybe you're watching this and you haven't been to church in a while. I know a number of folk who haven't got back to church yet. Listen, it's time you go back to church. You can't keep on putting it off. You need to get back to your church. You need to be in fellowship. You can't survive properly on your own. That's your thought for Monday morning. A big thought, I know, but it's so important. Have a good Monday. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.